Hi everybody, this is Katje. Welcome to my YouTube channel. Tonight I'm wearing a blue and white striped form-fitting dress. It's almost like a sweater dress with my black knee-length boots. So I wanted to kind of take on a West Coast look tonight because this evening the theme of my video this evening is California, sort of California stories, California content just a little bit. So let me wear this outfit for you here, and you can see the boots. I've worn these boots before, but I really wanted to try them with this outfit, so I hope you'll like that. I hope everybody's having a good evening, and we're having a little bit of rain here in the desert, so that's good. We look forward to that. So that's my kind of California girl outfit, kind of urban California girl outfit. And what I want to do this evening is start out by talking a little bit about a recent movie that's out. This is the movie by Quentin Tarantino that is called Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. So I went to see that yesterday at the theater, and I thought it was a really, really good movie. I would highly recommend this movie to you if you're interested. So I just want to talk a little bit about that, and then I want to say something about something that happens in the movie that has a connection with real historical events. So there are going to be some spoiler alerts in my discussion. If you haven't seen the movie, you may want to wait if you don't want these spoilers, if you don't want to find out about things, wait till you've seen it and then you can watch my video. But if you've already seen the movie, please, I hope you'll enjoy what I have to say. So let me start out by saying that the movie stars Leonardo DiCaprio, and it also stars Brad Pitt. Leonardo DiCaprio plays an aging, kind of a middle-aged actor who was in cowboy westerns, in the movies and on television, and he's kind of reaching the end of his career, or kind of a dead end in his career. And then Brad Pitt plays his stuntman double, and both of them are very, very good friends. The relationship between them in the movie is really, really close. The acting is superb. And at one point, Leonardo DiCaprio's character meets with Al Pacino's character. Al Pacino plays a director of spaghetti westerns who eventually persuades DiCaprio to go to Italy to make these spaghetti westerns by people like Sergio Leone and folks like that. So the movie is about DiCaprio and wrestling with his sort of diminishing stardom and trying to make decisions about his career. He's a heavy drinker, and his friendship with Brad Pitt. And it's a really wonderfully acted film. The direction is superb. The story is excellent. The cinematography is great. There's some wonderful shots in this film. It's one of those movies, really, that it really captures the feel of what it would be like to be in California at that time. It's like I think it's like 1969. Most of the movie takes place in February of 1969, and then it moves ahead to August of the same year, which I want to talk about in just a minute. But in any event, the mood of the film is wonderful. It captures that time. You know, the radio is always on. There's music playing. There are these ads from the time. The classic cars. You really feel like you're being drawn into that time all over again. So it's a wonderful film on that front. Now, basically, another very interesting thing about this movie is that it's interwoven with the infamous events surrounding the Manson family. And for those of you who are not familiar with that, Charles Manson had kind of a cult of followers known as the Family, and Charles Manson had recruited these people. Many of them were young girls, but there were young women, but there were also young men, and he made them followers of this kind of very twisted, strange ideology of his. Manson was a racist. He didn't like black people at all, and so he wanted to convince his followers that there was going to be a race war in which the white people eventually come out on top. And in order to ignite this, which he believed, strangely enough, was being revealed through the Beatles' music, especially the White Album, he persuaded them to commit a series of murders. And some of the people murdered, one was Sharon Tate, who was pregnant. She was the actress wife of Roman Polanski, the great director. So one night, some members of the Manson family went to the Tate residence, and they murdered Sharon Tate and the other people who were there. And then the next night, they went and murdered a couple at some other place in Los Angeles. So that's the Manson story. Eventually, those people were convicted and sentenced to death until California did away with the death penalty. And so they spent the rest of their lives in prison. Some of them are still there. Manson himself has died. So the film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, sort of is interwoven with these events in the Manson family, but it gives them a different twist. It's sort of like an alternative history of that. So I want to come back to that at the end of my video and say a little something about it. But before I do that, I want to share with you one experience I had several years ago when I was visiting a friend in California. And this was a person who had been very successful at writing celebrity biographies, and he'd made a lot of money, was a self-made man. And so he was living in this beautiful home up in the Hollywood Hills. He actually knew and was close friends with Brad Pitt and George Clooney, whom unfortunately I never got to meet when I visited, but I had a wonderful time seeing him. And but there was a strange thing about this kind of lifestyle, and by the way, a lot of the movie is set in the Hollywood Hills. I could recognize it's the same neighborhood. So what's interesting is that in the movie, you see people taking a lot of risks. So these people like Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate, one evening they drive out of their home. By the way, they live next door in the Hollywood Hills too, where Leonardo DiCaprio's character lives, even though they haven't met. They live next door to him, and so one night they're driving to a party at the Playboy Mansion, and they drive down these very twisting, narrow roads out of the Hollywood Hills very quickly, and they take a lot of risks. And what was interesting to me about this is that when I was visiting my friend in California many years ago, he was a very gracious person. He certainly wasn't taking any kind of risks like that, but he did take certain risks that I thought were troubling. And I don't say this in any way to cast aspersions on him or be insulting towards him. He was a very magnanimous and gracious person who invited a lot of people into his home. The problem is that you didn't always know who the people were in the house, and more importantly, whom those people might know. There was the question of, well, do you really know who these people are who are staying with you, and do you know whom they know? Because if they have access to the property, then other people whom you don't really know anything about and who may have very unsavory motives, they also might have access to the property. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Manson events know that this is kind of what happened with Charles Manson. Sharon Tate was living in a house on Cielo Drive, and previously that house had been owned by a man named Terry Melcher, who was actually the manager for Dennis Wilson, one of the Beach Boys. And so Manson had actually visited the Cielo Drive property when Melcher lived there. He was trying to persuade Melcher to offer him a record contract because Manson played music and he wanted to be a prophetic voice. He wasn't very talented, but he was trying to persuade Melcher to offer him a contract. And they talked several times, but Manson had visited the property. And I think he actually came back after Sharon Tate had taken it over, had bought it, looking for Terry Melcher. But the point is that Manson knew the layout of this property. And so that enabled him to tell the members of the family, how they could access the property and reach Sharon Tate and the people who were inside, because he knew the layout. And my point there is that if, this was a fairly well, had a pretty good security system. I think there was actually somebody who was a security person or somebody in the driveway sort of keeping lookout that the Manson family members killed on their way in. But the point is, if even in that situation where the property was relatively secure, but unfortunately Manson knew the layout and was able to get into it, in the case that I was describing with my friend, where he's letting people stay in the house whom he may not know very well, and he certainly doesn't know whom they know, that creates a risk. In fact, during that time, or maybe shortly before that time, I think that somebody who had been staying at my friend's house actually accessed a computer that George Clooney owned and had left there, and tried to crack into it to the point that Clooney had to shut down his accounts and change his passwords and go through all kinds of security measures in order to protect his content. So this is the kind of risk that I'm talking about. I think the movie captures that, and I think it's a kind of troubling aspect of the life of the rich and famous in this very exclusive community in the Hollywood Hills. Not trying to insult anybody, not trying to tear anybody down, I'm just making an observation. Now, the last thing I want to say about the film, and again I highly recommend that you go see it, is that at the end of the film, it tells a kind of alternate history. And again, this is a spoiler, so if you don't want to hear it, please skip over this part. But in any event, what happens is that the Manson people, instead of going to the Tate property, they wind up going to Leonardo DiCaprio's next door property, where DiCaprio and Brad Pitt have just spent a night drinking and carousing. They've come home and they're getting ready to drink some more. I think DiCaprio goes out and is floating in the swimming pool on a raft, and then Brad Pitt is in the kitchen feeding his dog. He brought his pit bull along. And so when the three Manson family members come into the house, Brad Pitt basically unleashes all kinds of violence against them and kills them. He sticks the pit bull on one of the women. I think that another one of the women, I think he hits her with some kind of heavy object, I can't remember exactly what it was, and bashes her face in. And so he kills, in a very violent way, all three of these Manson family members, which is not what really happened. Unfortunately, they killed Sharon Tate. And I actually think that there were four of them, well, there were five of them who went to the house. One of them stayed back in the car because she was too afraid to go in. But the other four Manson family members, three women and one man, they succeeded in breaking into or entering the Polanski and Tate house and then committing those murders. So that's not what happens in the film. What happens is that the Manson family members get killed by Brad Pitt, who's very good at martial arts. He's a very skilled fighter. He knows how to defend himself. He knows how to take care of intruders. Now, I suppose that somebody could object, well, look, it's very violent. It's bloody, it's gory, and some people might think it's over the top. I don't think that, and let me conclude my video by saying why I would defend Tarantino's decision to depict this very violent exchange between the Pitt character and the Manson characters when they're murdered or killed by Pitt in self-defense. I think a lot of us who either were alive during the time of the Manson events or later, read about them, as I have, when we read about what Charles Manson ordered his followers to do and what they did, it really is infuriating. I mean, it's awful. They wound up killing these people, including Sharon Tate, who's 8 months pregnant and was begging for her life. They wound up killing these people, and really for no good reason at all. And so I think that there was a kind of anger that a lot of us felt about that, a kind of frustration. And in a way, what Tarantino is doing at the end of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, with the very gratuitous violence by means of which Pitt kills the Manson intruders, I think that it's supposed to be kind of cathartic. A lot of us felt very upset about that, and I'm not saying that it's okay to kill people, we shouldn't use violence like that. I'm not trying to justify what Pitt did, although I think that he acted in self-defense. I'm not trying to say that we should do that or that we should want to do that, but the fact is it's natural to feel that way when you hear about the very gruesome murders that the Manson family members committed under the direction of Charles Manson, who was basically, kind of an evil little clown who was very good at persuading people to do what he wanted them to do, when he could figure out how to exploit their weaknesses. So I think that the movie, through this very extreme violence, I think that it's a kind of catharsis. It allows those of us who were so upset and angry about what happened to the Manson family victims, it gives us a way, an outlet of sort of blowing off steam, a catharsis of dealing with that anger and that frustration about what happened to these innocent people. So again, I really highly recommend that you go see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I really enjoyed it. Again, I think it was an excellent film. It is an excellent film. I think the performances by Brad Pitt and by Leonardo DiCaprio are Oscar worthy. I think they should both win Oscars, certainly be nominated. So, and if you certainly like Quentin Tarantino, then you're going to like this movie. It's not like some of his other films, but I really think it's probably my favorite film of his that I have seen. So this is Katje Eckhart. I recommend that you go see it, and I hope that everybody is enjoying their late summer, mid to late summer. I wish everybody a restful and a peaceful good evening. Please take care of each other. Be good to one another. This is Katje. Until next time, bye-bye.